Welcome to part two of Not Your Grandpa's Weed and why adolescents need to be very careful in using cannabis because of the risks that are associated with it. So I'm standing here beside what appears to be a Muppet, could easily be on the Sesame Street. This is a plant that is in the backyard of friends of mine, and 4 years ago, having this plant here would have landed my friends in hot water with the authorities. But on October 17th, 2018, the Liberal government of Canada decriminalized the possession of marijuana, so that in Canada now you can grow up to 4 plants of marijuana in your own property. You can buy a certain amount of cannabis product from licensed retailers literally across the country, as long as you're 19 years of age or over. Now, um, federally they said 18 years, but provincially, most of the provinces, my understanding is it's 19. I believe in Alberta it might be 18, but there you go. The oil-rich province can easily do what they want, obviously. Now, I'm going to talk about the biology in this plant and a little bit of the history of the marijuana plant. So first of all, this character has roots that go back to the time of the Pharaoh or longer, 12,000 years or more. My understanding is, in my reading, that they found residue in pottery in the pyramids, in the burial chambers of the pharaohs. So obviously, its use for various reasons goes back an awful long time. These plants were cultivated for hemp, for fiber, for rope, sailcloth, for clothing. There was a huge industry built around hemp. But obviously, sometime in the past, some character, some bloke decided to get the dried leaves, upper leaves, and flowers and buds, and combust them and inhale the smoke, and found that he felt euphoric, and the future of the marijuana plant, cannabis sativa, was guaranteed. Now, the chemistry in these plants is really fascinating. They're just little powerhouses, and as you'll hear shortly, the the plants produce over 140 forms of a chemical called a cannabinoid. And interestingly, each of these cannabinoids has its own property when ingested by humans. So there's a cannabinoid that helps nausea associated with chemotherapy, for example. Another cannabinoid is an appetite stimulant. Cannabidiol, or CBD, is one that many of you will have heard about because of its pain-relieving properties and anti-inflammatory properties. And of course, then there's delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a cannabinoid that interacts with receptors in the human brain, and collectively, from the impact in the human brain, collectively makes the user feel euphoric or floating or chill or mellow. So these are some of the properties of these cannabinoids. And as a physician, I remember hearing people tell me that so and so was dying with cancer, and they were in their bed, and for palliative care, they smoked a joint once or twice a day, and it relieved nausea, gave appetite, relieved pain, relaxed them, and so on. So it wasn't the delta-9 THC that was doing it. It was the other properties of the cannabinoids that were ingested when the person smoked a joint. Nonetheless, it makes it all the more fascinating to me at what goes on in a simple plant. And you know, they are very, very unusual. I don't know the full botany. There will be people in the industry who could tell you a lot more about it. But suffice it to say, it is a very, very different looking plant. Now, the properties of the cannabinoids are, one of the major properties of cannabinoids is that they are oil soluble, fat soluble. So when you ingest, or I ingest, any cannabinoids, they seek out, or they find themselves easily getting into fatty tissue. So the human brain is very lipid rich, and so when THC gets to the brain, it easily suffuses into and gets involved with the tissue of the human brain. This fat solubility is very important in understanding the impact of using cannabis on humans because of its effect on, because of I know I'm stuttering a bit here, but because of a term called half-life. And the half-life refers to how long it takes for 50% of a given substance to be metabolized and leave the human body. So because of the fat solubility, THC and CBD have half-lives around 36 hours, which means after you have a joint, 36 hours later, half of that ingested THC is still in your system, in your tissue. And 36 hours after that, half of the half, or 25%, is left. So you see that it has a potential for accumulating in the body if it's being used regularly. The other really very important fact to take home is that the precursor molecule for THC, the parent, is also the parent molecule for CBD. So that one compound, the molecule that's going to be THC or CBD, can only be one or the other, depending on the genetics of the plant. So there are some plants cultivated that favor the production of THC over CBD, and this is what's happened over the years. Progressively, as plants have been cultivated, the levels of THC have increased in the cellular structure of the plant relative to the levels of CBD. So when you read the literature, you'll see that this is a fairly major concern when it comes to young people using cannabis, using products from marijuana, because they suspect that the high THC compared to the lower CBD is contributing to some of the mental health issues that kids are getting. But that is really the extent of this, and I just want to kind of walk through what happens when you smoke a joint. So let's say I have a joint on a Saturday night. I inhale about 400 compounds, many of which are going to be cannabinoids, and they get into my bloodstream very quickly, within seconds. Within minutes, the THC is spreading into the vascular network in my brain and gradually getting involved with the neurons, the nerve cells of my brain. And so within minutes, I start feeling euphoric or feeling high. After about 4 to 6 hours, the THC levels are going to be dropping in your system as they gradually metabolize away. And so usually 4 to 6 hours later, the user stops feeling high. And the corollary to this is if you used an edible, you have to absorb it through your gut. It has to pass through the liver before it makes its way to the heart. As it moves through the liver, some of the THC is metabolized, so you don't get quite the same peak uptake of THC in your system. So the effect of using edibles is slower in coming on. So if you have a brownie at the end of supper that has been infused with THC, it might be an hour to an hour and a half before you feel high. And of course, this leads to some people inadvertently taking too much from their brownies. They might go and cut another piece out of the pan, and in fact, but inadvertently and unintentionally actually kind of get excessive levels of THC in their system. Another very interesting point that needs to be made that it causes me great concern. I discovered a study done on pilots, done in roughly 1991, if memory serves me correctly. Pilots were given a joint to smoke, and then they were put in a simulator for specific lengths of time. And they were tested at 2, 4, 8, 12, 24, and 36 hours in the flight simulator. And it was very interesting. Out of 9 pilots, 7 of the pilots failed the simulator tests. They performed very poorly, even though that's at 24 hours after, even though they didn't feel high, which tells me that there must be still some effect, cannabis effect going on in the brain that actually can impair us, and we might not even be aware of it. So as I mentioned in the manual that I wrote, It's generally advised do not drive while you're feeling high for 4 to 6 hours at least after you used cannabis. I would recommend, just from what I've been reading, it should probably be longer if you were using edibles. And myself, just from this evidence, I suspect that some people may actually have impairment due to the effect on the cerebellum, which has to do with coordination in the brain. Even though they don't feel high, they're not aware of feeling high, there's actually still sufficient THC left that it impairs these responses. This is a very important issue. It's certainly not, I don't think it's something that's really confirmed. I know that there's a lot of studying going on. So I think that's all I want to say now regarding the biology of the plant. Please stay tuned for another segment basically on our own neurobiology and how cannabis affects our brain, and then I'll take a look at what I've discovered, why teens are different and why we have to think differently around this topic. Thank you.